It's 9 o'clock. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, on tonight's program. Ukraine's largest children's hospital is bombed as part of a major Russian attack across several cities. At least 31 people are killed and 130 other injured. Young cancer patients were among those caught up in the hospital bombing, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer describing it as depraved. All this on the eve of the NATO Summit in Washington. Was Vladimir Putin sending a message to the West? We'll be live in Moscow. Also tonight, Biden hits back. The US president rejects calls to quit and throws down the gauntlet to those Democrats who dare to defy him.
If any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention. I am not going anywhere.
And here in France, we look at the fallout from last night's shock election that means the country is set for a hung parliament. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening from Paris, a capital city still coming to terms with that shock election victory for the far left. Last night, we witnessed mass celebrations because the far right failed to take power. Fears about France's future in the EU, its place on the world stage, and its commitment to Ukraine all seemed to ebb away. Many were quick to claim that President Macron's big gamble to call an election hadn't backfired after all, but it certainly hasn't paid off. On tonight's show, we'll look at why those on the far left could still pose a major headache for a president under pressure. Tomorrow, Mr. Macron heads to Washington for a NATO summit hosted by another president who can perhaps empathize with his troubles. Joe Biden has had to defend himself again today amid growing calls for him to end his bid for re-election. More on that shortly. But I want to start with Ukraine. A major attack there today means the country will be top of the agenda at tomorrow's Washington summit. At least 31 people are dead and more than 130 injured after several cities were bombed. The most shocking incident, though, a children's hospital looking after cancer patients almost completely destroyed. Well, Ukrainian officials reported attacks in 6 cities across the country, killing more than 30 people. Sky News' data and forensics team has geolocated missile attacks to a business park, a private clinic, as well as a children's hospital, the largest children's hospital in the country. The hospital is near government ministries. Russia claims they were targeting military industrial infrastructure. Our defense and security editor Deborah Haynes has more.
This is meant to be a sanctuary for Ukraine's most poorly children. Instead, it's become a war zone. Trauma for the tiniest of patients. Young boys and girls battling serious illness, now forced onto a new front line. The hospital basement is where many parents took their children for shelter as Russia launched a barrage of missiles towards Kyiv and other cities. But any kind of movement is dangerous for the most vulnerable.
We first heard the explosion. It wasn't far away. We reacted quickly. My daughter started screaming. I didn't think this could happen, that there could be an attack on a hospital where there are sick children.
Footage captured the moment the missile struck Ukraine's main children's hospital. Other images showed the aftermath. Russia confirmed its military had launched missile strikes against Ukraine, but said the targets had been military manufacturing sites and Air Force bases. No sign of either here. Nor at this residential block, also in Kyiv.
We went to the corridor during the air alarm, and we saw the fire and heard how the rocket was flying and the explosion took place.
Ukraine's president called for more Western support on a trip to Poland.
Ukraine is now initiating the convening of an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council in connection with the Russian attack on civilian infrastructure, including a children's hospital.
Many see the attacks as a deliberate ploy by Russia to dominate the agenda on the eve of a major NATO summit of world leaders in Washington.
This is par for the course for Mr. Putin to hit civilian infrastructure, and he doesn't care whether he's hitting hospitals or residential buildings. I can't draw the line that this is some sort of message. But look, I mean, as I said, what you're going to see over the course of the week is a very set of strong signals and messages to Mr. Putin that he can't wait NATO out, can't wait the United States out, that we're going to continue to support Ukraine.
We are defending not just our homes and our cities and our country. We're defending every one of you because Putin goes so far as far we're allowed to go.
The latest devastation, the starkest of reminders of what's at stake. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, I can now speak to a doctor who works at the Children's Hospital, Lesia Letsitsia. Thank you so much, doctor, for joining us here on the program. I've seen some of your images and we're going to show it to our viewers in a moment, but it was a devastating incident, especially devastating for everyone inside that hospital.
It's even impossible to explain what we are all feeling now, because for us, our hospital was like a place of power and like protect hospital. And it's really very hard to imagine that the same people as we can attack pediatric hospital. It's one of the biggest hospital with a lot of patients with serious disease who need medical support 24 hours per 7 days. And now it's really very destroyed. At the moment of attack, we all was in the hospital and continue our work. And
yeah, just describe to me the moment the airstrike took place, because of course we've seen the aftermath, but what happened inside the hospital once you realized you were under attack?
You know, we all have terrible feelings and afraid that it can happen. And we imagine how it can happen. We discuss exactly this with colleagues. First, what you saw when you're near the hospital, the light, then you sound, it's awful sound, and then you don't hear nothing, except you realize that you need to go outside and see what happened and where you can be useful. So it's really damage. A building is nothing. Thanks to God, almost all our doctors are safe and they stay alive. But at the moment when you see the wall is falling down, you realize that the awful things which you're afraid can happen exactly happen at this moment. And every doctors firstly take care of their patients and then go to the emergency room and help to injured people.
Yes, doctor, tell me, because at the time of the attack, there were surgeries taking place, for example. There are patients in there, children in there, who have all sorts of illnesses and can't be in an environment that, you know, half the hospital is under rubble. They need to be in very clean environments. They need medical attention and care, their own medicine at all times. How are you dealing with the scale of this and all of these children?
So at this moment, we manage it between the Kyiv hospital. We contact with other hospital and evacuate all patients to other hospital in the same condition. But the patients who can stay at home or at least in clean not in the hospital, or at least not with not so severity illness. They stay in the flat near the hospital. We divided patients in 3 groups who need immediately help, and they was sent like a first line. Then who need to be sent it because they are planning surgery or etc. We just put it on a pause for 2 days to manage where we can continue our work. And the third patients which have planning and it can be delayed. So we ask them go home and waiting for our contact with them. For tomorrow, I have a big surgery day. I talk with one of the private hospital, and all surgery go to this hospital. It will be patient will be operated without any payment. So we decided to contact between the doctors, between the private hospital who can take care of our patients.
And do you think that eventually your hospital can be fully up and running? Because we have seen those images of the rubble, for example, and doctors, nurses, other staff trying to work through that rubble. Will the hospital be fully functioning in the immediate future, or are you still waiting to see what happens next?
No, firstly, we need to see how many damage we have, but for sure we will back to fully functional in the nearest time, because the worst things which can happen with us is to stop to work and to stop to live. So we make as much as it possible to continue work in the nearest days.
Yeah, Dr. Letsitsia, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you very much for your interest.
Well, the UN Secretary General has condemned the attack, but Russia denied targeting civilian infrastructure. Our Moscow correspondent, Iva Bennett, joins me now live. And Iva, this was an incredibly brazen attack in broad daylight. We did see these sorts of attacks in places like Mariupol at the very beginning of this conflict, but certainly not in the center of the capital in Kiev. Certainly not, in recent months and at least in the last year.
Well, there are differing accounts over what caused this destruction at the Children's Hospital. As we've seen and heard, Ukraine is adamant that Russia was deliberately targeting civilians here, deliberately setting its sight on the Children's Hospital. They say they have evidence. They say they're going to share that evidence with the International Criminal Court in The Hague. But Russia is saying they've done nothing of the sort. The Ministry of Defence here has put out a statement in English on the social media platform Telegram, saying that they carried out airstrikes on defence industry targets and aviation bases in Ukraine. There's no mention of a children's hospital. In this statement, though, they do refer to the footage and photos of the destruction that we saw in Deborah's report there. But they claim that this was the work of Kiev and a Ukrainian air defence missile, appearing to suggest that this was a deliberate act of self-harm. They don't provide any evidence to back up that claim, but they do suggest a reason, suggesting that it's an attempt by Ukraine to garner support from NATO. I think what this really underlines is there's 2 wars being fought here in Ukraine, the one on the battlefield and the one in the information space, the propaganda war.
Yeah, indeed. And although we focused on the hospital and the children there, as we reported earlier, there have been a number of other cities targeted and attacked across Ukraine. But of course, business as usual in Moscow, including a visit from the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the timing of all of this is no coincidence, coming on the eve of this NATO summit in Washington. Because what is not in denial here from Moscow is the fact that they've stepped up their aerial offensive on Ukraine here. And it feels like Russia's very much trying to flex its muscles here, show the West that they have the upper hand on the battlefield, that in their view it's pointless and futile to continue supporting Ukraine. But as you say, Narendra Modi is here. Here are the pictures from this evening, him being welcomed by Vladimir Putin at his residence just outside Moscow. And I think this is what Russia also wants the West to take notice of, because this is an ally of the West and a key trading partner for Moscow. And if you're Vladimir Putin and you want to show the West that the attempts to isolate you aren't working, that you still have friends everywhere, then what better time to welcome the leader of a country like India? It serves the perfect visual antidote to a NATO summit. And I think the visit at the end of last week, the surprise visit from Viktor Orban, Hungary's leader, to Russia, served a similar purpose for the Kremlin, because this was an EU and NATO member shaking hands with the alliance's arch enemy. So put all this together, what's happened in Ukraine, Narendra Modi's visit, Viktor Orban's visit last week, it feels like this is another power play from Vladimir Putin and an attempt perhaps to try and make the West rethink their strategy when it comes to Ukraine.
Indeed, the United States always describing India as its strategic partner, certainly when it comes to dealing with China. Thank you so much, Ivor, for the latest there from Moscow. Now, a meeting of the UN Security Council has now been called for tomorrow after the Secretary General strongly condemned the hospital attack. And this comes on the eve of that NATO summit in Washington. How will Western leaders respond? Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is joining us from Washington. And Mark, I mean, Ukraine has made it very clear to its NATO partners what it wants. It wants membership. And certainly when you look at what's happened in Ukraine at the moment, those leaders are currently planning on meeting in the United States, and Ukraine will be top of the agenda.
Yes, and you can expect that there will be language in their communique which is still being worked out and which will be released at the end of the summit on Thursday, that there will be language that talks about an irreversible path towards NATO membership for Ukraine. A bridge is the way it's being described, from the state that Ukraine is in now to, down the line, NATO membership, which of course is what Ukraine has always wanted, what has not always been guaranteed, but the West would argue has become a done deal effectively, or will become a done deal because of what Russia has done over the past few years in Ukraine. Of course, Russia turns the whole thing the other way around and says the only reason it invaded Ukraine was because it believed the West was pushing on its western, on Russia's western frontier. But to pick up on a couple of points that Ivor was making then, first of all, this idea that this was an act of self-harm by the Ukrainians, that they hit their own hospital. Well, the State Department have been speaking in the last few minutes and have made quite clear that it is the view of the US government. This was the work of Russia, no question about that. British sources have told me they believe the same to be the case. This was not an act of self-harm by the Ukrainians. It wasn't some sort of misfired missile by the Ukrainians either. And they point out too that NATO unity NATO is more united now than it has ever been. And so the idea that Ukraine needs to try and push NATO to become more united from an American perspective is ludicrous, because it is so united, and unity is what we will see at the summit over the next few days. The other point to pick up on, you mentioned these meetings that Putin has had with the Indian Prime Minister Modi, with Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister as well. These meetings irritate the West, quote unquote, NATO leaders. And of course, remember, Hungary is a NATO member. So for him to go to Russia and then to go to China, to Beijing as well, it's awkward. It does not look good, and they are not hiding the fact here in Washington that they are irritated about that. In fact, sources to me have tried to point out, look who Russia's allies are: North Korea, Iran, those sorts of countries. Well, yes, but also look who's visiting Moscow at the moment. India, as you say, a strategic partner of the United States. It's awkward indeed. This is a key summit, probably the biggest summit of its kind here in Washington in 3 decades.
Yeah, indeed. And as you say, on the eve of that, someone like Modi paying that trip to Vladimir Putin, his first time in Moscow since the invasion of Ukraine, as you say, no doubt irritates the West and the United States. But also, With Zelensky being there, he will take a shopping list, as he always does, and will say, look what happened at this hospital. We need more air defense systems. We need protection. And he knows himself, he has a very limited time to make these requests, given the looming presidential election in November.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the elephants in the room. There are quite a few elephants going to be in the room over the next few days. One is Biden's performance, another story entirely. The other is the spectre of a second Trump presidency and what that means broadly for NATO. He has talked about pulling out of NATO in the past. I don't honestly think that many believe he would actually follow through and pull out of NATO. Indeed, behind the scenes, you'll find some Western countries pointing out that it was Trump, not Biden, who forced so many NATO countries to spend more on defence while he was president last time around. It's also the case that the American president alone cannot pull out of NATO. It requires an act of Congress for that to happen. And the judgment among Western leaders is that Congress would never agree to that. So that's that point. But it's clearly the case that Zelensky wants as much support as he can. I think what we will get out of this summit over the next few days is much more talk of unity, of this bridge to a membership for Ukraine, a bridge with conditions, no question about that. What we're not going to get, Yalda, is any sort of articulation of what the day after looks like, what the end game is, what the settlement looks like, because I think behind the scenes everyone agrees that a settlement would involve a concession of land by Ukraine to Russia in the far east of the country. The question is, where does that border lie? How far can Ukraine push the border eastward, denying Russia as much land as possible before they go for a settlement? But NATO's view, the view of the alliance, is that's not for them to decide. That is for Ukraine to decide. Briefly, I should point out two separate matter, but it is clear now, we have had confirmation that Keir Starmer, Prime Minister Starmer, will meet in a bilateral meeting at the Oval Office on Wednesday with President Joe Biden. This is something the Brits have been hoping would happen. It's fortuitous that Starmer is here because of the NATO summit, but because he is here, clearly a bilateral meeting was really important to them. And you can see here a statement released in the last 15, 20 minutes or so from the White House outlining all those areas where the two countries have such a close alignment. And as you can see in the middle of that statement, those two words which mean so much to the Brits, special relationship. It's there in black and white. That will please this new British government.
Yeah, indeed it will. Mark, as always, thank you so much. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, still to come on the programme. Who exactly make up France's new left-wing coalition, and what might it mean for the country's political future?
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine How much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake? Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Welcome back to Paris. I'm Yalda Hakim. Talks are now underway to decide who will lead this country as Prime Minister after a shock election result saw a coalition of far-left parties emerge as the winners. It could take weeks, and because of that, the current Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, is staying in post for now. Well, let's just have a look at the final results. The left-wing coalition known as the New Popular Front, which includes Jean-Luc Mélenchon's France Unbowed party, came first with 180 seats. President Macron's centrist coalition called Ensemble was second with 159 seats. And Marine Le Pen's National Rally finished third with 143 seats. In response to the result, France's Prime Minister Gabriel Attal offered his resignation. The 35-year-old only took the role in January, making history as the youngest and first openly gay person to hold the role. He is a member of Mr. Macron's Renaissance Party, and his boss has asked him to stay on in the role for now to ensure stability after the election. Political custom says the next head of government should be chosen from the strongest coalition. And right now, that includes the Socialists, the Greens, Communists, and France Unbowed. But Jean-Luc Mélenchon is unlikely to be nominated. Mélenchon is a divisive figure with a hardline stance on issues ranging from the economy to Gaza. He's also been accused of being anti-NATO and pro-Russia. So discussions over a suitable candidate are likely to focus elsewhere, with a period of political deal-making ahead. Our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, is in Paris and has this report.
France has awoken to political turmoil. In the midst of this scrum is Gérald Darmanin, Emmanuel Macron's most trusted minister, insisting there will be no deals with the far right or with the far left leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. The former Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, another ushered through the melee. But the kingmakers now could be those from the left, socialists like Jérôme Guége.
Obviously, the president is still in charge. Nobody asked his dismissal. But we have to find something we have never done in France, what we could call the kind of coalition.
And Dieynaba Diop, freshly elected into parliament and insistent that France needs to recover from rancor.
All the French people need us to be to the right place and to be stable in this time. And we have been very frightened, but now we have some relief and we have to work on it.
Monsieur Mélenchon?
I don't know.
The National Rally, favourites to win this election, will now be only the third biggest group in the Assembly. Their young president striking a tone of contrition and humility.
Mistakes are always made. I've made mistakes, and I also share my responsibility for this result. I was the leader of the national rally both at the European elections, but also in this campaign. And so I assume my share of responsibility for both the victory in the European elections and the defeat.
This nation, one of the richest and most influential in the world, now finds itself mired in instability and uncertainty. There is no precedent for all this. And so the MPs that we've spoken to arriving here have all said the same thing. There'll be no quick, easy answers. The question is, who will be the next Prime Minister? The present incumbent, Gabriel Attal, came to the Elysée to try to resign today, but he was told by the President that he had to stay on to give the country stability. In Paris, left-wing activism is often focused on this area. It's called Stalingrad. Here we met two friends. Constance voted left, Beatrice went right. She wanted to see Bardella as leader.
On the question of security and the well-being of French people, he speaks really well about that. And we need a man like him to lead our country. France is very selfish, but I think at the moment, with everything that's going on, we need to be selfish.
Now they watch and wait, hoping for leadership. Do you think you will get a Prime Minister from the left?
We will see that in a few days, but we don't know who. I think they have to work a lot.
The Olympics will arrive in Paris later this month. The city is still being spruced up. France is ever more in the global spotlight, but at the moment it feels politically rudderless. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paris.
So, a truly seismic political event. Let's just take a look at how the French newspapers reacted to this news. The centre-right daily Le Figaro reads, "The national rally has failed. The left prevails over Macron." The leading financial paper, Les Echos, goes for the slap over a face of the 28-year-old Jordan Bardella of the national rally. The centre-left, Liberation, goes for what a relief. Le Monde's front page read, "France is holding its breath over what happens next." And finally, Le Parisien pictures President Macron with the caption, "And now what do we do?" Well, let's discuss the reaction to all of this with our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, who's here with me. Adam, what a night we've had, and you've been out and about in town all day today trying to get a sense of how this city and this country have reacted to this news.
And I think those headlines sum it up. You know, what happens next? I've asked that to a lot of people today, from voters up to senior MPs, and broadly got the same reaction, which is, we don't really know, we're still shrugging, but we're beginning to get a plan. So you have this range of reactions, Yalda. I think what we're seeing is the outlines of what could it lead into a coalition. The timescale, for one thing, difficult. So I spoke to one MP today who said maybe by the end of the week, another who said it could be months. But I think that coalition is beginning to take shape. But at the same time, politics is happening. You're in this city, you know, there we go, the Eiffel Tower is lit up in the colours of the Olympics. Gabriel Attal, extraordinary, a Prime Minister of a G7 nation who turns up to resign and then drives out again, still with his job, because the President says, effectively, no one else will do this, Gabriel, and someone has to be Prime Minister. I can't remember anything like that ever happening in a country of this consequence. So I think there is this feeling that France is scraping around, trying to find leadership. But also, you saw it reflected in those headlines. From the left, from the centre, a feeling of relief. They thought that National Rally wave was going to swamp them, and it didn't. You go out of Paris, though, go up to the north of this country, you'll find plenty of National Rally supporters who, in a sense, feel enthused, because they'll say, this is exactly what we've been saying. The establishment doesn't want us. They're against us. This is proof that we have to persevere. And that's the energy that Jordan Bardella and particularly Marine Le Pen want to keep hold of. And right now, you go to a bookmaker's, Marine Le Pen is the favourite to win the 2027 presidential election. So there is a feeling, I think, among some on the left and in the centre that they've won the battle, but the political war rages on.
It does. And actually, in some ways, they're in a better position than they were 3 weeks ago before the snap election. They've got more seats.
They've got lots more seats. That gives them more influence. It gives them more income as well. It gives them a set at the table, and this curious table with three groups who have broadly the same number of seats and a feeling of mutual antipathy. I think that is at the heart of when we talk about this, remembering the left don't like the centre load the right. The far left and the far right, weirdly enough, are the two people who sometimes have kind of common ground, but broadly the left and right would never help each other.
Adam, I'm curious. I mean, we saw Jean-Luc Mélenchon come out and say, look, we've saved France. Who is the leader of this alliance that's newly formed, only sort of 6 weeks old or something?
So the alliance, just to be clear, is the Communists, the Greens, the Socialists, and his group, La France Insoumise. Jean-Luc Mélenchon he's been a figure in the French left politics for years. He comes and goes. He created this party best part of a decade ago on a whole series of platforms, including starting a sixth republic, saying I'm going to transform the voting system. We think it's flawed. I mean, he is a pretty far left at heart. He wants to tax the rich. He wants to distribute money. He initially wanted to pull France out of NATO. He's gone sort of cold on that. And he took some pretty hard positions on Israel and Gaza, which delighted some, but has also ostracized him from the rest of that. So this left, we call it a coalition, but it is a fragile coalition. I mean, spoiler alert, Jean-Luc Mélenchon thinks he's going to be Prime Minister. He won't be. There might be a Prime Minister from that grouping. I think it's exceptionally unlikely that it'll be him.
He and Macron don't like each other much either. So, Adam, we'll talk to you a little later in the programme, but thank you so much for all of that. Now, after the first round of voting, there were major fears, both here and internationally, about what the National Rally may do in power. And while that lurch to the right might have failed to materialise, many across the world have been left wondering what it could mean going forward. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this report.
All eyes on France, but now for all the wrong reasons. 3 weeks before the Paris Olympics, the country is plunging into deepening political crisis. As he plots his next move inside the Élysée Palace, analysts say President Macron knows he has only himself to blame.
Emmanuel Macron emerges from the snap election weakened and kind of isolated. So he's now looking at parties that are now stronger than him in parliament, that are very opposed to his own policies, and whose priorities is actually to take apart his legacy.
It is all a far cry from Emmanuel Macron's triumphant march to power. He promised the French a break from the endless left-right squabbles of their politics, but they are now threatening to consume his presidency. He became leader here at the same time as Donald Trump in America. He was hailed then as a saviour of Western democracy, but is being blamed now by many for crippling it in France. Disenchantment and division are only getting worse here.
All of this matters outside of France because it is such a powerful, consequential nation at the heart of Europe, of the West and world affairs. If the crisis here deepens, it could have major implications far beyond France's borders.
The French Parliament is now a house even more divided. But the crisis should not be overstated, say some. A far-right takeover has been averted. And France is used to having a chaotic parliament and an aloof president ruling by decree.
And the whole idea of the Constitution is you have this almost king-like figure. They call him an elected monarch. He can pretty much do what he likes. He can rule by decree. So with all this division, you have this one man, you have this president with enormous powers. He is fit to govern, and he will carry on governing. So I think that's what we're looking at the next 3 years.
But rarely, since President Charles de Gaulle founded France's Fifth Republic, has it been so tested. Should it fail, extremists on both sides are waiting in the wings and becoming stronger. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Paris.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Lots more from here in France shortly, but next up on the programme, more pressure mounts on US President Joe Biden to step down in the presidential race for the White House. Welcome back to the program. Joe Biden has lashed out at those Democrats, calling on him to bow out of the race for re-election. US President phoned into our colleagues at MSNBC and suggested his critics challenge him at the upcoming Democratic convention. Our US correspondent James Matthews is following events in Washington and sent us this report.
The start of a working week on Capitol Hill. For a number of Democratic politicians, an increasing number, the job is to get rid of Joe Biden. To the stories told in this place, add the one about a president facing party calls to step down amidst concerns over his age. He answered them in a phone call. On a morning TV show, they had the president on the line. He didn't care what party elites wanted, he said. The voters were on his side.
I wanted to make sure I was right, that the average voter out there still wanted Joe Biden. And I'm confident they do. At any rate, the bottom line here is that we're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024.
This was Biden campaigning in Pennsylvania at the weekend. Every performance now is a test of his fitness against a drumbeat of doubt.
My name's Joe Biden. I'm Joe
Fueled
Biden's
by his
husband.
debate performance and stories since. According to Axios, the president is provided with documents showing his path to a podium with pictures and large print. Joe Biden had text of his own for congressional Democrats, writing in a letter, "The voters and the voters alone decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. How can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? I cannot do that. I will not do that." The working week has begun with a Biden fight back, but the fight goes on. He's put party democracy at the heart of his survival campaign. But as one critic put it to me, they did indeed back Joe Biden to be their presidential nominee. But they also voted to put Kamala Harris on the ticket, the vice president, tipped as a ready replacement. The fences are up in Washington, D.C. for the 75th NATO Anniversary Summit this week. Joe Biden will be its host. It is a big week in the business of the presidency for a president taking it day by day. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
Thank you.
And James joins us live now from Washington. James, you and I have often talked about how stubborn Joe Biden is. He's now digging in, telling those critics to back off because he believes he's the one who can beat Donald Trump, just like he did in 2020. But the polls say something very different.
Well, exactly, Yalda. Yes, stubbornness. And we've seen it and heard it today from Joe Biden, both in that TV interview and in that letter. I can tell you the bad news for him is that it hasn't necessarily registered with his critics, those 9 and counting within the elected Democratic base here in Capitol who have come forward and called for him to step down. I spoke to one. He said, I heard the interview, I've seen the letter, I'm still frustrated, worried and fearful. They have a message to sell, I was told by this person, a message to sell on the Democratic side, but they don't have the messenger to tell that message. And he talks about Biden's claim that he was the man to beat Trump. The answer to that is, well, the Democratic machine in 2016 came together in a way it had never before to propel Biden to power. And, you know, that business of democracy, Biden trying to pull the strings of democracy, saying, I was voted for by the party base. If you don't back me, that flouts the democratic principles of this party. Well, the answer to that was that the primary process, that democratic process, also elected Kamala Harris to the ticket. And she is being very much lined up by many observers here, inside and outside, as the person to take over. So Biden raising the stakes in talking about democracy here. His party and he attacks Donald Trump. It's the basis of their campaign to say that Trump is anti-democracy. Trump is entitled now to say, well, don't throw stones in glass houses because listen to your president. He's characterizing an element, a growing element within his own party of being anti-democratic.
Yeah, James, as you say, you know, he's also said come and challenge me at the conventions if you dare. So we'll have to see how the next few weeks and months unfold. Thank you so much. Let's return to events here in France now. This city and this country is still coming to terms with a political earthquake delivered by parliamentary elections. Victory for the far left. So far, we've heard what they stand for and how the result might be received internationally. Now I want to bring you the voice of French voters. Well, earlier I walked the streets of Paris and spoke to some of those who cast their ballot. Have a listen. Last night we saw joy and celebration, a sense that this country had stopped the far right from taking power. By morning, there is uncertainty, a hung parliament, shaky alliances, and turbulence in the years ahead. So what do Parisians think about what happened? Did you vote for the National Rally?
Yes, I did. I defend things that the left doesn't defend at all, and I'm more of a traditional French. I do not have any problems with strangers or immigrants or things like that. In fact, I do love new people that come in France and love to have people as well, but I think that we have to focus more on the French problems and to focus on French people a bit more.
Even if I didn't vote either in the first or the second tour, I'm more happy that the left had a better result than the right, because I think it's a better picture to give to other countries, because we have seen many European countries going to the right, for example Italy, and it hasn't changed anything except giving a bad picture of the country, because it wants to close itself to other people. And at least in France we have this difference to still saying to the world we are open, we are kind of optimistic.
It's not a winner popular winner Macron. It's just a lot of winner, but not a winner, that's all. So it's complicated for governments now, I think. Very complicated.
Were you worried that the National Rally, the RN, would come to power?
RN it's like a shadow in my head or in head of French people.
Some voices there in Paris. Well, joining me now is Charlotte Mainvilly, who was a Green candidate as part of the new Popular Front Alliance. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for joining us here on the programme. You came second in the second round. You only just, by a 0.5%, lost to one of President Macron's candidates.
Yes, that's right. It was very close. So you know, we did a fantastic campaign here in Northern Europe to try and convince people to vote for our alliance, the Nouveau Front Populaire. So I'm from the Green Party, and so we just narrowly missed it. But I think next time we'll be able to win this seat.
Yeah, tell us about this coalition. It's made up of a number of parties. We're still trying to get a sense of who within the party is likely to emerge and be its leader. Last night we heard from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but we're hearing a lot of people say he doesn't represent us. Is there going to be sort of, political wrangling within now for you guys to figure out who is actually the face of the party?
Yes, I think the parties on the left, as you mentioned, it's an alliance, and in record time we were able to form this alliance, because remember that when President Emmanuel Macron called for a snap election, we had, very limited time to be able to come together. And he was probably banking on the fact that we weren't going to unify, but we did with great responsibility. And now we're in discussions about who would be the Prime Minister, because, of course, we've managed to avoid the far right. So the worst has been avoided, but the best is still to build and to try and develop that. So our party leaders are currently in discussions also with our parliamentarians to try and see who could be a consensual figure, someone to represent us, and to start forming a government to try and put in place our policies around our manifesto for social justice, environmental justice, to try and improve people's lives for the better after the 7 years that we've had.
And Charlotte, are there any, names that are emerging as potential leaders at this stage?
There are a few. Recently, I've heard about Clémence Guettet from the France Insoumise, but also, the leader of our party, the Greens, Marine Tondelier, has been very present in the media in these last few weeks, actually, and she's played a bit of a central part in this alliance. And there's also members of the Socialist Party and others in the Greens. So I think it's still very much to be decided at the moment and in discussions.
I mean, there is also talk about how shaky this alliance is. Do you think that it can hold it together, given all the different factions within the alliance? An alliance that, as you say, came together very quickly, and even within the alliance, some of the beliefs, the ideologies, the values, the policies differ.
I think we agree on a lot of the essentials. And actually, when you look at the policies that we've put forward, whether that be to try and increase the minimum wage to 1,600 euros per month, or to scrapping the pensions bill that Emmanuel Macron put forward, or the immigration bill, or looking at environmental policies such as investing in renewable energies, or insulating homes, or looking at what we can do to try and improve people's lives, to make sure that school attendance is completely free and that there's no additional hidden fees, etc. So there's a lot of things that we really agree on, and our program is really strong. And of course, our alliance is rich of its diversity, and I saw that also within my campaign, because I'm from the Greens, but I was campaigning with all of the parties on the left. And actually, I think it gives us a lot of strength to be able to have so many people come together, so many different perspectives, and everyone brings their different perspectives. But we're going to do something
here,
positive together.
And I have a minute, but I have about a minute, but no party has an outright majority. So in some ways, you will have to work with the others as well, outside of your alliance.
So what we're planning to do is not do a coalition. Our institutions aren't really set up for that, but to have a minority government and to have some kind of agreement to be able to pass laws like, the budget law, or to be able to reach some consensus on certain legislation, for example, and passing certain things on decrees. But of course, we're going to need to have some kind of agreement, not enter in a coalition, but have some kind of agreement to be able to put forward some policies and measures that are going to improve people's lives for the better.
Lives, indeed. Charlotte Minvili, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, you've just heard there the various different voices in this city and in this country as they try and figure out what next. And that is the big question. There is still a lot of uncertainty here in France. They have spoken. The far left and the various other parties have managed to prevent the far right from taking power, but that hasn't taken away the tensions that simmer beneath the surface. All day today we've been out and about in Paris, and life continues as normal. Talks around the Euro football matches, for example. Planning for the future continues, but the tensions remain. We will continue our coverage of the situation here in Paris, but for now, good night.